Welcome back to another episode of TimeOut with the Sports Doctor podcast, where life, sports, and medicine intersects. We are glad that you are part of this growing community, where we strive to help you strengthen your mindset, help you grow your assets, and help you achieve whatever level of success that you want for your life. Go to our website at Dr.Derrick, thesportsdoctor.com, where you can find all the latest content, and you can also follow us on our social media channels. Now, let's get into this episode. So welcome back to another episode of Time Out with the Sports Doctor podcast. And we have a very special guest for you today, Dr. Patricia Tibbs, who is a doctor, of course, a pediatrician, a wife, a mother of four. My favorite title is she has been, or I guess I can say was, my children's pediatrician for years, but still in my mind, she still is. And she balances so many things. I'm very happy to have you on the show today. And I already know that this is going to be a blessing for many.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Sure. So we had the pleasure of working together for almost a decade before I decided to relocate.
How dare you?
Yeah, how dare me. So you are actually one of the first people to welcome our family when we moved to Laurel. So we're always very appreciative of that. And then, like I mentioned, just all the many years of taking care of my kids, all the many late night text messages, out of the country text messages. What do we do? You know, we really are appreciative of that.
Exactly. Yeah. And
definitely can't take that for granted.
That's right. The part I enjoyed most is how y'all became part of our family for my daughter's wedding. That was very good.
Yes. That will never be forgotten. You know, give me the festival that we attended, the pre-wedding event.
Quandula.
The Quandula, yes. That changed my kids' life. They all want to have Ugandan weddings now. So that was a beautiful event.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yes. And your oldest daughter has been on this show as well. So she actually had a two-part episode. So I don't know if we'll be able to top that.
She didn't. No, let's not.
But when you have a daughter that's a naval pilot, that's a special story. So
that is true.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about, since we have now, this is the time of the year that new doctors are finishing residency, graduating from medical school, starting their careers. So let's just kind of talk about your early expectations for medicine and how you thought your career would be versus kind of how it started out. So kind of give us your backstory.
I grew up in Uganda. So I remember very early on, I wanted to be in the medical field. I mean, I was one of those children who was treating their dolls. You know, we had a hospital going in the bedroom. Yeah. But I thought, and I told my dad that I wanted to be a nurse. And he told me that would be wonderful, but why don't you be a doctor? And you know what my question to him was? Can I be a doctor?
Wow.
I did not know a single woman who was a doctor, not one at that time growing up. And so he said, of course you can be. So I was like, well, then, let's aim for that, But yeah, he encouraged me. He's a physician too. He did pharmacology, so he taught medical school for many years, retired and still busy. But it was his example and his determination and his blessing and just the care he gave that allowed me to be who I am and allowed my 5 siblings to be who they are. They all have done really well, and we just thank God for that. But also thankful for parents who drove us to the best version of ourselves that we can be. So that has driven a lot of how I think about who we can be and just encouraging everyone around us to be the best version of themselves that they can be. So my dad, interesting, it's just a 1-minute quick story, but he was raised poor, single mother, and he got a scholarship to go to Hungary in Europe to medical school from Uganda. But none of the administration at that time in Uganda would give him a passport. So he bought a bicycle and rode it. Literally saw, this is Uganda, Hungary's up there, let me head that way with my bicycle.
Wow. Talking about driven, huh?
I know. So by a series of riding bikes and stowing away on a ship and ending up in an embassy in Khartoum or Alexandria, somewhere, Egypt or Sudan, somewhere, he managed to get to Hungary to his scholarship and became a doctor. That kind of determination, just amazing. But
Yeah.
never could emulate that. But that's how he, yeah.
But when you set the tone by overcoming all of those barriers to achieve your success, I mean, just hearing that story one time, I can imagine how many times as a kid you heard him tell that story to other people, or,
Yes.
that you witnessed that in action. So it takes away your boundaries and takes away the limiting thoughts that you might have growing up in Uganda, or growing up when you're thinking about how do I go from the thought of being a nurse to now, wow, the possibility of being a doctor. And once you probably flip that switch, I mean,
Yeah.
it probably wasn't going to be many things to stop you from becoming a doctor at that point.
Right, right. I remember, well, yes. So I was determined to do that. I went to medical school in Uganda and then wanted to have further training. At that time, things have changed now, but at that time, I learned all about medicine, but did not have the lab. For example, if I wanted a CBC, I literally had to do a smear on a slide myself and look at the cells, because
Wow.
that's the only way I was getting a CBC. I learned about CAT scans, never saw one. X-rays were hard to come by. So you relied a lot on just listening to what your patient was saying and examining them and then going from there. Taught me a lot about just being very practical and clinical in what I do. And so, I desired to get more training just to get to where I could see these machines and how they work. And just so at that point, we were newly married, and my dad encouraged me to do the American board exams. He said, that's one of the ways you'll get some good training. So I said, okay. So he paid, he emptied his savings account so that I could take the American board exams. That was $1,000 of almost everything he had. But so I was so stressed out. I had one chance to do this thing and do it well. So I did, and matched at the University of Illinois. And so came with my husband, Patrick, 2 suitcases in tow. And that was in 1993. And we came, and actually late 1992. And we came from 2 suitcases. We grew to the family you met.
Yeah. Yeah. And talking about believing in your dream, you brought Patrick, who is your husband, but who was also a tennis pro, right?
Yes, he
So,
was.
so he tell us a little bit about his background.
So I met Patrick in Uganda. He lived in London for a long time, played the tennis tour, taught tennis in several clubs all over the world, and came to Uganda at a time when we were having a tennis tournament. And I was so fed up of studying pathology. And I thought, I'm going to play in this tournament. I had registered, but I didn't think I would be able to go because, pathology.
Yeah.
I was so tired of it. So I went, and I found everybody crowded around Mr. Patrick Tibbs, who was playing 2 youngsters who I thought were the best players in the world. They really played well. And so he was volleying with them, him on one side and them on the other side. The whole crowd was just watching. And so I stopped to watch and thought, oh my goodness, and I was one of the few who didn't know him. The tennis community knew him, medical school. You go,
Sure,
you
right,
play tennis, you go
right.
back. Yeah, right. Tunnel vision. Anyway, yeah. So I met him at that tournament and we built a relationship from there. Yeah.
And there you go. 4 children later, and a whole, like you said, the rest is history.
That's right.
Well, so talk about after you were finishing your training, you decided to move to Laurel, Mississippi. So kind of tell us about the early years of training and your initial kind of intentions of what you were going to do versus kind of how things turned out in your career.
So I was one of only 9 girls in a class of 100. I think we were 9 with 100 men in my medical school classroom. So I knew early on that I really wanted to do pediatrics. I went through rotations of doing obstetrics and surgery and internal medicine while in Uganda, and I realized that it was children I loved to work with. So I matched at the University of Illinois. I love what you're doing with young physicians, because I was just talking to my husband. I said, there were many points in our career when we could have changed the trajectory. And I'll talk about that shortly. But So I came, loved my residency, enjoyed pediatric residency. And then as I was finishing up, I wanted to do a Master of Public Health. So I did that in maternal and child health. And so we were in Chicago for 5 years. And at that point, we had a decision tree. Were we going to go back to Uganda, or were we going to stay and raise children here? At that point, we had two children. So my parents and Patrick, we made the decision that we would stay. So in order to stay, we got a job in Laurel at a community health center, which is where I needed to work in order to stay. Loved the work over there. And I still remember one of the board members who interviewed us, and when I finally got here, and he says, well, what is it that you'd like to do with your life? I mean, what do you see yourself achieving? And I had so many philanthropic goals, which is a thing, right? There's so many things I want to do for others. Mm-hmm. But then he turned it around and he said, what about you? What is it that you want to do? And I had all these things in the ether, right? Nothing big, I wanted all the things everyone wants. Raise children who are useful to the world, love God, kind, and have a home and a retirement, right? That was the thought, right? And then came to work in Laurel and quickly got very busy, extremely busy. And so the point that I'm making with all of this is that you come out of residency, med school residency, and then suddenly you have this income that you can so quickly grow into if you don't have a plan, which is what happened to us. No plan, so you quickly realize that you survive just fine on your residency salary. And now all of a sudden your attending income is not enough,
right?
Because you didn't make a plan, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so at some point we sat down and we said, okay, what is it? One of the big things for us was, that our children would know who they are, their legacy, their relatives, their family in Africa and in Hungary. We really wanted that. So we did a lot of traveling, right? That's one thing we don't regret, because they do know all their cousins. They know their uncles. They know Uganda. They know Hungary. That's been amazing.
Yeah.
So, and I stress that to everybody. When you know who your family is, when you know the grandparents, as much as it's in your power, let your children know who their people are and let them have a good relationship with the people who are theirs, because that is part of legacy building for your family. It's so important.
Yeah. And one thing that you brought up about your family is all over the world, but so connected. And that was one feeling that I got from attending your daughter's wedding. I mean, you had family from Hungary, London, Uganda, all over, but it was like everyone was still so connected to you being in small town Mississippi. And I felt that was amazing, but it was intentional. You had to be intentional about that, because it was very easy for you to move to Mississippi and just really disconnect yourself. But that was not one of the main goals that you had for your family. So you made sure that you stayed connected and that you traveled and that your kids are well-rounded and have a global perspective of life and not just a small town perspective of life. I think that's very important.
Absolutely. And it's so important that one of the things that I teach, I talk to parents a lot in my practice, is the power of words. There's a way words, they'll fly out of your mouth when you're in passion of some sort, anger, irritation, and they just kind of loiter around and they drop around and break people's hearts, and you can't bring them back, Yeah. And that's one of the things that my mother especially was very adamant about. And I think it's because of that, she kept saying it. It's because of that I have an amazing relationship with all 5 of my siblings. And because, you think these thoughts and you just don't let it come out of your mouth. And it's something that I've also tried to train my children about. It's just building positivity and realizing these are your people. There's a lot of ways in which you can build your family, and there's a lot of ways in which you can just damage it with a few poorly chosen words. And
I agree.
so it's one of the things of legacy parenting is really choosing the words you use to address your family, to address your friends. Because, Derrick, children are amazing at copying us. They don't listen to
Oh,
us
yeah.
as much as they copy us.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
100%. At a very
yeah,
early age. I mean,
yes,
you're talking
yeah,
about 2 and 3-year-olds that can completely mimic you and things that you do,
yeah,
even when they don't really know what it means. So,
yes,
yeah.
absolutely,
So
absolutely,
let's
yeah,
talk about, so you brought it up, legacy-driven parenting. Let's talk about
yes.
that concept and what it means. As healthcare providers, we spend a large portion of our lives focused on our training as well as taking care of other individuals. But I'm calling a timeout because life can change in an instant. We know it's difficult to fathom that a sudden illness, injury, or death could put you and your family in a devastating financial situation. But that's where Dr. Stephanie Pearson and her unique team of advisors at Pearson Ravitz come into play. They focus on empowering physicians like yourself to protect your most valuable asset, your income, and life's most important people, your family. So go to pearsonravitz.com to make sure that you are protected today.
So just the thought of thinking through your parenting goals. Like I told you, Derrick, I wish two things that I wish somebody had told me way earlier. But the thing is, it's never too late. So once you
Right.
realize it, you start. One is just being purposeful and intentional and not sweating the small stuff. Always asking the question, what's the worst thing that could happen if I allow this to happen? If it has long-term, horrible, negative implications, absolutely, strictly parent on that. But if it's something that has no almost no impact on a child's future, there's choice. Let the child, develop wings and grow, So being intentional, purposeful in that, and then integrating your life and your work. That's the other thing that's hard, especially for mothers. I mean, the studies are out there. Mothers do, in many, many households, mothers have 2 or 3 jobs. And one of those is just the home, right? You
Right.
finish your work at work, and you get home and you have a whole other day to go through, right? Just homework and laundry and dishes and just sports events for the children and all of that. So just finding your team. I tell people always that with each of my children there was somebody, and I'm so thankful that just like Jessica did everything, the one who was on your podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like everything, soccer, basketball, speech and debate. I mean, and then I had 3 younger children, and I was a full-time physician, and at that time I think I was doing call 1 and 2. It was a little bit crazy,
Yeah.
right? And so her best friends had an aunt, she called her Nan. Oh, that lady took Jessica everywhere with Allie. That was amazing. I mean, I just tear up when I think about it, how much that helped. But just a team and thinking outside the box. One day, this is another story of one day I was called out. Pediatricians attend C-sections.
Right.
So I was called out to a C-section, and it was 30 minutes before Patrick would get home. And I had to go.
Right.
And so I was thinking, so I called a friend of mine and I said, I have to go for this C-section. Oh, yes, it was actually one of the nurses at the nursery. I said, I'm alone with my children, 3 of them, young, and I said, I can come. It's just 30 minutes. And then, you know what she told me? She says, let's see what the headline will say tomorrow. Pediatrician. Pediatrician leaves home, which burns down, or
Yeah.
something like that. So drastic. And I thought, I got to do something. I
Sure.
have to have a way. And, I prayed about it. I thought about it. And right about then, my sister called me. I mean, within a day. And this is purposeful thinking. And it's amazing how, when you're in crisis and you're thinking outside the box and you're wondering what to do and you're praying about it, things happen. My sister calls and says, is there any way I can come and do college in America? I was like, yes, there is a way.
Yes.
You come and live with me.
Yes.
Go to
Yeah.
school in the morning.
Yeah. Right. Whatever it
Yeah,
takes.
yeah, whatever it
But
takes.
this is so important for young physicians to hear because you have so many thoughts in your mind about how things are going to play out. And then you start practice and the real world happens and life happens. And you say, oh, I'm not going to have kids for the first decade. And you have kids in the first year. And then you have to figure out life or whatever it is. You just have to be flexible. I remember moving to
Absolutely.
Mississippi, similar to you, no family around,
Yeah,
and two working parents. What are we going to do? At first, I remember the first time our financial planner sat down with us and said, you will need to get someone to help you with your children, a nanny, whatever it is. And you're not going to be able to make everything. You're not going to be able to make all the practices, all the
yeah,
rehearsals. You're going to have to figure out what's important and do it. And we were like, no, we're not getting a nanny. We're going to be there for our kids. We're going to raise our own kids. Kind of the fear of if we are not there for everything, we'll be neglecting them, and then they'll one day grow up and hate us for it or something. But you'll quickly learn that you are not going to be able to be
to do
everything
it
for
all.
everybody. You're not going to be able to be the great doctor, the great parent, the great person who is on every committee. You're going to have to learn what's important, and from your priorities, build your relationship and build your family life around that. And you're going to need help, whether it's from a family member or from a nanny, an au pair, whatever it may be, babysitters. You're going to need help, and it's
You're
okay
going to
to
need
need
help.
help.
It is okay.
Yeah,
People, it is okay. And I think there's this fallacy out there that if you're not at your child's everything, you're not a good mother.
especially
No,
when they attend private school.
no, exactly.
Yeah,
No, that is not a thing. They say it's Mother's Day with children at 10 a.m. on Tuesday. No,
yes, yeah, yeah,
uh, this
yeah,
mother is probably not going to make it. And then
right,
I teamed up with other mothers who couldn't make it for the same reasons. And then we
sure,
let our children know we're still wonderful. We love you very much. Just because we did not make it,
sure.
muffins with mother,
Yeah, that was
we
created
still
by the
love
mom that
you.
was at home.
Yes,
Yeah.
we love you.
Well, no, that's great. I'm
Yeah,
glad that we discussed that. And it's that work-life balance that we're talking about. In most seasons, it's not going to be 50-50. Sometimes it's going to be 70-30. Sometimes you might swing the other way where you're able to be more present, especially if you have different types of careers that maybe do not require a call, or that you have shift work, or if you're
that's
doing
right.
locums work or something. So really just take
That's
that
right.
all into play and figure out how you want to design your life, because you don't have to
Absolutely.
just come out and find a job, which is what is ingrained in our heads so many times. You're finishing residency, you're finishing fellowship, the people around you have a job secured, and now you're in panic mode.
Yes.
Take a breath, relax. Your career is going to be much longer than you think, you
Then, yeah,
know, and then that
yeah,
first job, most time it's not going to be your final job. Most
that's
people
right.
are not going to do like Dr. Tibbs and live in the
And
same
stay there for
city,
30
right,
years.
for 30 years and have a great practice. It just doesn't
Yeah,
tend to happen like that anymore. And it's okay if
yeah,
it doesn't happen like that. So,
absolutely. It's okay. Everyone has their trajectory. I mean, don't look at anyone else's. Yours is
yeah,
beautiful. And, you just focus on the things that are important to you and you make those happen. But you have to think of
absolutely.
them. You
Right.
have to think of them. Yeah.
Yeah, I
So,
agree. So tell us about how you became an author. Now you have published 5 books and the latest 3 children's books. So kind of give us a background on that.
So here's the thing. As I'm thinking about that, family was very important to me. So the first book that I wrote was actually an ode or a tribute to my mother. She had died recently. She died in 1997. And just an amazing woman, Hungarian, married to my Ugandan father, lived in Uganda for her entire married life, raising children and just worked full time. By the time she died, she was a very high ranking person in the Ministry of Finance in Uganda. She was a busy mother, right? She was actually, she's who I look to. If anyone can make it being a mother and balancing it all. So that first book it's called Chords, and it is about my experiences being called different races and skin colors and people attributing me to different, backgrounds. So the first time this hit me was when to give birth to Jessica, my first child. Derrick, nobody had ever asked me what my race is. And I was confused, right? Mm-hmm. Because in Uganda, that's not a thing, So the debate in my head lasted only seconds, but it was a lifetime of thought, right?
Wow.
And then I realized, I was raised as my father's child. So I'm African, I'm Black. And I told her that. And when I thought about it, I thought through my life, and I've been labeled a lot of things, And it's been interesting just thinking through that. And so the book it has 6 chapters about 6 attributes that have been given, Sometimes I've been called white, I've been called Black, gold, mixed, colored, everything. Mm-hmm. And so just the thought, just thinking through that and writing it down and just mostly focusing on how important it is to build family, whichever family you have, right? And I was really blessed to have parents who stayed married and until the death of my mother. And so just the legacy of that, of working through my dad living in Hungary at first and how that wedding came about and how the thoughts of the people when that happened in Hungary, they had a wedding and the whole village showed up to see this African man marry their daughter, right? Wow. It was a spectacle, I hear. And then my mother coming to Uganda and all of that. I actually have a picture of my 2 grandmothers together, very different but very similar women. But anyway, so that's the first book, just a legacy on family and how important that is. Yeah, and it's called Chords. And then I wrote a book about teens. And this one is about raising teens to have healthy relationships. Just some thoughts on things to focus on. And it's a quick read. And it just makes you rethink, because if people are going to have a crisis in parenting, it's often when they have teenagers. That's when it usually will happen.
We will make sure that we download this book, purchase this book. We are having that conversation. We had that conversation last night. Welcome to Teenagers. We have a 13-year-old, soon to be 11, and then 9. But that's the next phase of life, figuring out what's appropriate, when it's appropriate. What do you expose them to? Because you have to expose them to something, right?
Something, yes.
If not, then they're 18 and they're leaving the house and they're like, it's party time. So how do you do that, and when is it appropriate? So we'll definitely be checking out that second book.
Yes. There's something to be said about being very protective, but at some point you're going to have to give them some liberties. Because the last thing you want is for your child to turn 18, get to college, and just not know how to live.
Right.
They don't know how to govern themselves. They don't know where to put all this internet use, because you limited them and didn't give them some freedom while they were at home. That's an especially big one for me is realizing how important it is to allow children to make choices under you, especially between the age of 16 and 18. Very, very important. So raising teens. And then 3 children's books. So the series is a character building series, and it's about a very proud and egocentric camel and inattentive donkey and a low self-esteem rooster. So these are stories cute stories about these animals. And actually I wrote them because these are 3 animals that had a relationship with Jesus Christ. And so, the rooster that crowed and the donkey that carried him and the camel. Yeah. So that's what I wrote. So anyway, the whole thing about that is Derrick, when you're building children with their legacy in mind, you are reading to them in their younger years. You're exposing them to things of the world and just with them living outside the boundaries of what you call home, so that they know about other people, they know about other places. And sometimes all you have to do is just read, so their imagination sees all these things, right? And then in the teen years, you're doing your finishing touches, so that teen book. And then all the time, you're building family. So that's Chords.
Yeah, I love that. It's 5 books, but it's truly a series. So,
Yeah.
and you wrote it in reverse order
In
almost. So
reverse order.
that's perfect. Well, we
Yeah.
will definitely include those titles. We want all the information, tell people where they can find those books. Are they on Amazon, or where can
They
they
are on
purchase them?
Amazon. So if you, drtibbsbooks.com,
Okay,
they're all
perfect.
there. Yeah.
We'll include all that. So
Yeah.
on Time Out with the Sports Doctor, this is your final timeout. So we've discussed a lot about your start in Uganda and family and how helping people raise children. A
Yeah.
lot's been discussed, and I think it's been a beautiful 30-minute discussion. So we're talking about young physicians, young parents, people trying to build a legacy for their family. Just give them something as far as where do they start, or how do they even grasp the word legacy? What does that mean? They might have never heard of legacy in their family. How do they
Right.
start from today to build a legacy for them and their children?
Well, define your values and your mission. What is important to you? Remembering that family is very important, and also the legacy of money. You want to teach your children about money. I mean, how it's used, how it comes about, how it's spent, how you can build it, and how to use it for philanthropy and taking care of others and yourself. And whatever it takes, build your team. Team is so important, be it a helper in the home or somebody who helps you clean your house, especially mothers, right? But integrating work and life, and then just being purposeful and thinking through the long term. Don't just think about today and tomorrow. Just think about in the long term, how important is this thing that I'm doing? And it may be important because you must do it now. Yes, do that. But also think about the things that are long term, right? And the most important thing to realize is that our children, they are every single one of them unique, right? People have written books about children, but none of our children read those books properly, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you uniquely have to work with the character of each child and just developing that relationship with your children. And as young physicians, if before you have children, just also think through what is that legacy you want to build, right? Do those things that build long term and use information out. There's so much out there about what you can do. And before, let me tell you, that an almost 60-year-old physician tell you, you fit into your residency salary, right? Fit into it for another year and just build
Change your
a
life.
legacy. Yeah, it
Yeah.
will
Yeah.
change your life. I wish someone had told me that.
You're right. You're absolutely right. Well, thank you for all the words of wisdom. Thank you for being an integral part of the Burgess team. And, just thank you
Thank
for all
you.
that you've
Thank you
done
so
for the
much.
community. Well, I really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Derrick.
Thank you for continuing to support this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, then please leave a 5-star review. And if you haven't done so, subscribe so you continue to get the updated episodes. Until later, peace.
Hey, time out with the sports doctor. Keep our head right in the game. We ain't never stopping. You are now tuned in. Trust you don't want to miss. This is where life, sports, and medicine